Welcome back, politics nerds, to the Politicast, the podcast dedicated to learning your policies like your ABCs. For those of you just joining, the Politicast is an educational podcast intended to educate young and future voters on government systems, current events, and the intricacies of elections in the United States. Our goal is to increase voter turnout and interest in politics amongst the youth population. So, without further ado, let's get into this episode. So, as we're young and Gen Z is growing up, social media platforms have continued to evolve. Now we have TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, X, all of these various platforms, but they're doing more than just keeping us connected with our friends and our family and sharing our lives. They're becoming tools for advocacy, raising awareness, raising money, and even discourse on justice. But I think we need to take a step back and look into how much influence these social media forums should have when it comes to legal outcomes, when it comes to the lives of other people. In today's episode, we're going to be unpacking how various online movements and digital voices are both helping and hindering the justice system within the United States. Today, we're going to look over a few real life cases where social media has actually led to appeals and even protests and even policy change. But we'll also be exploring the darker side. What about social media misinformation? What about pressure that it places on legal proceedings? So, whether you're interested in advocacy for justice or curious about the role of digital spaces in shaping our legal landscape, this is a conversation you don't want to miss. Before I start today's episode, I would like to give a quick disclaimer that I've conducted my own research and it has been thorough and extensive. However, I have really only included surface level facts of the cases to simply examine the media's attention and the media's scope on these cases. I'm not intending to deliver my own opinion on these cases, and I will not do so throughout the episode. The facts of each case presented are not a reflection of my opinion, rather a reflection of the research I have completed in terms of these cases, and what both the prosecution and the defense are arguing on these cases will be included, and they will be approached very holistically as opposed to having a bias. I'm simply intending to use this video to talk about the media's influence within the case, not including any discourse on the guilt or whether or not these individuals are guilty. Furthermore, all research will be cited. If I use any numerical statistics, I will cite them. All of my other research comes from looking at articles, watching documentaries as such. Before we start the episode today, I would like to start off by citing a New York State Bar article. First of all, they explain that an influence on a jury when there's a famous client involved is pretty significant. We can look at some famous cases where a famous client might be involved, such as the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard case. Now, also, 46% of a jury reported that they Googled the defendant or plaintiff, especially if they're notable individuals. This serves directly to prejudice a jury, especially in these high-profile cases when there is a famous person involved. So, I want you guys to keep this in mind as you go through today's case. Once again, I'd like to say this isn't about the guilt of any of the individuals stated in this case. Rather, how has the media really influenced them to change their case, to update their case, and what is the power of the media within their cases, really? So, the first case that I'd like to talk about actually happened a while ago, but is extremely relevant today because of how much the media really has focused on it. So, let's start off with California versus the Menendez brothers. So, a quick overview of the case. Two brothers, Lyle and Eric Menendez, were convicted for the murder of their parents. So, the prosecution argued that the brothers committed the murder because of financial motivations. However, the defense claimed that the children did so as a byproduct of abuse that they'd been facing throughout their life. This trial was incredibly sensationalized by the media, and the case continued to capture a significant amount of public attention even after the two brothers were convicted. Recently, and in 2017, Netflix released a documentary upon the murders, and it literally scrutinized the case of the brothers, looking at evidence and claims made by the defense specifically. Viewers of this series tended to be gravitating more towards the brothers because of the portrayal of this alleged abuse committed by their father. The stark details and the horrifying elements portrayed by Netflix led this case once again to fall in front of the public eye. Currently, the brothers have now asked for an appeal on their case. Here's why. There's a clear public interest within the case, and scrutiny upon the facts that will actually lead to the appeal of their conviction. The defense believes that they have more information that would reverse this conviction that they previously didn't believe they had. These are three things that the defense is really focusing on right now. The abuse claim. This is something that the defense felt that they fully hadn't discovered or shown in the first trial, but now, through the media portrayal and other factors, they feel as though they have a stronger case to present. They specifically believe the psychological impact of the abuse is going to further bolster their case, and they claim it's something they didn't have in the beginning of the trial, or they didn't have as much strength regarding. Now, the second thing is the court of public opinion. The amount of media attention garnered by this case is immense. And I think so much of this public is heavily focused on getting either the case retrialed or re-examined. And there are people who also believe that the brothers are guilty. However, we have these presentations through Netflix documentaries and social media and so much discourse on platforms like Instagram and TikTok that people are, kind of people who do believe that they are not guilty are kind of rallying around and saying, okay, retrying the case. And the legal team of the Menendez brothers has a very, in what I believe to be a strong window, since the court of public opinion is, from what I've heard and from what I've seen, is a little bit more swayed towards the brothers to kind of retry and reopen up that case. There were also claims that the defense made that there were actually prior media biases. Now, the attorneys of the brothers claim that the media during the first time of the trial actually did the opposite of what we're kind of seeing right now. They, in fact, sensationalized and kind of diminished the effects felt of trauma felt by the children. You can see that if you kind of watch the first-ish episode of the Menendez brothers documentary story kind of on Netflix, you'll definitely see this in the sense that uh the brothers in fact spent a lot of the money after their parents passed away after getting the will money, but then later on you can see in the documentary the portrayal of that horrific alleged abuse that happened against them as well. So the Netflix documentary, I would say, definitely does kind of show two sides of the coin and two sides of both the arguments made by the prosecutor in the defense, but it is definitely more portraying the defendants of the brothers, because it kind of takes you along their story and it does get more and more about them as you go on throughout. In the first episode, this is kind of my personal opinion, but I felt like it was a little bit more towards what the prosecution argued, and then as you continue subsequently onward, it got a little bit more favor of what the defense really argued in this situation, but arguably they were just trying to show both sides of the case. Now, this documentary on the Menendez brothers really played a significant role in their appeal, as I mentioned, and you really have that shift of public opinion that you're starting to see. And a lot of people I know are posting TikToks about it, following the case very closely, and also putting pressure on the legal system to re-examine the fairness of the trial. So currently their conviction has not been overturned, but it has raised awareness about their case and plenty of other cases regarding that kind of abuse as well. And it did bring the case back into the public eye. This is a clear example of how modern media, especially TV platforms like Netflix, can really influence public opinion in legal proceedings. Now, the next case that I want to get into is very recent, and it's regarding Luigi Mangione. So, if you're unaware, Luigi Mangione has been alleged in the murder of the United Healthcare CEO. This case has been sensationalized and really portrayed in the media in a lot of different ways, in a lot of different lights, and I think it's very interesting to see it. Sometimes on TikTok, you have people romanticizing him, making him seem like a very attractive individual, and that is something that we're seeing a lot on TikTok, but we're also seeing a lot of scrutiny in the political policy space when we have a lot of scrutiny regarding healthcare policy, what Luigi Mangione was really going through, and a lot of highlight on that. So let's kind of go through what media sensationalism we've seen in specific. So in his case, involving the alleged assassination of the CEO, it quickly became really publicized. The media focused really on the shocking nature of the crime. The first thing I remember hearing was the deliberate measures that Mangione took to really formulate his plan for the crime, the weapons. Furthermore, I also really heard that he was a Penn alumni. This was huge. I think the fact that he attended an Ivy League institution and now allegedly murdered someone was really big for a lot of people, and especially in the eye of the public. And he was well educated, and that was an argument that a lot of people, thought of and kind of came up with in their head. But he was alleged to murder a very high profile CEO. Now, in terms of what his motive was, it really led to the scrutiny of the healthcare industry and healthcare in America. And so it did lead to more scrutiny of the healthcare industry. And we know that Mangione had a spinal injury and had an injury that really impacted him and had a personal connection to the healthcare industry. So the motive that Mangione allegedly had can be used, kind of for scrutiny and everything. And obviously this is all alleged so far. So the second thing is kind of not really, I'm not going to dwindle much on this case because it's still in the process of being tried, but the media has definitely been very prevalent in this case. And I was looking at this case like a couple hours ago, and there's still articles coming out. There's still stuff coming out regarding his case, and different types of news media, different types of outlets are all covering the various facets within this case. Now, let's just kind of look into this. Media outlets have really blurred the lines between a criminal case, politics, or policy reforms that may inspire. Media's sensational coverage of murder and the proposal of motive, reasoning, defense, prosecution, it's really painted this complex situation where public interest and crime or alleged crime kind of come together and they're intertwined. And especially in the Mangione case, we see that public um, interest and the alleged crime are kind of intermingled, especially because of the debates on these healthcare reforms. So I want to kind of give a summary of what we've talked about today. So we looked over two cases, two very impactful and meaningful cases, and we looked at how the media, how documentaries, social media, Instagram, TikTok, has portrayed both the real alter of these individuals, has painted them in different lights, in various lights, and what the impact has truly been on the public opinion. And I think I've been saying court of public opinion because really that is also another, like, it's not really an official court or anything like that, but public opinion does matter. It goes directly to reputation, it goes directly to bias. So when we're in a situation like that, I think a really like important facet of public opinion, the court of public opinion is what a lot of people do care about at the end of the day. In terms of guilt, if we find someone guilty, then they're guilty in the court of public opinion. Even if they're not guilty in actual court, they can still be considered guilty in the court of public opinion. If they're not guilty, maybe in the court of public opinion, they can still be found guilty in a court. And I think public opinion also does matter, especially. And when media coverage comes to it, we're really constantly presented with information that we're swayed towards one side, and that's what it's really important to. So before I talk about opportunities to get more involved in ideas such as these, I want to kind of talk about recognizing bias. Obviously, we all have our own personal biases, and they do come through in various ways. Whether it's the content you interact with on social media, the TV shows you watch, who you choose to hang out with, we have our personal biases. But when you're looking into cases, when you're looking into political action items, I really recommend that you look at things with an open lens. I think that every side has a reason and every side also has a counter argument to the opposing side. So I think when you're looking into bills, when you're looking into court case decisions, such as Supreme Courts. I'm in taking a class in government, and we look at these Supreme Court cases, such as Fred Korematsu v. the United States, and there's two different arguments. Like everyone tends to have a bias either towards Korematsu or the United States. In this case, I will personally say that I was very much on the side of Korematsu, and I was looking at the U.S. argument still to see why the U.S. took the actions and the steps they did. So, as opposed to just looking at one side of the case, I highly always recommend you're looking at both sides to really avoid misinterpreting the facts or finding yourself biased towards a side when you don't know what the other side is really talking about. So now on to the getting involved segment of the podcast. So I don't really have any specific involved organizations to really get involved in rewarding these two cases, but here's what I want to tell you today. Do your research. When you want to talk about something, I think always researching both sides, looking into media, looking into the prevalence of it is really important. I know personally within this podcast, there have been moments where I've said stuff, but I haven't like um in the beginning where I hadn't researched it, and I feel like I had to go back and look into it, and then I'm like, oh, I can't say that, or yes, I was right, but I need to research. I think research is super critical and super important. Obviously, it doesn't have to be like a 10-page paper, but looking at both sides, things like the Second Amendment, there's two sides to that argument. Things like, I don't know, different ideas. There's always two sides to every coin, and I think you really want to look into each perspective so you can create your own opinion. Looking at both sides and then creating your both opinion is the most effective way. You are entitled to your own opinion, but just to help yourself, conclude and come to that opinion, being heavily researched and having a good idea of why you're taking the stance you are is really important. Now, if you do believe in certain policy forms or certain ideas that I've talked about throughout this podcast, not in just this episode, I highly recommend you write letters to Congress, participate in organizations online. There's a big social media platform, but also please be conscious users of social media and make sure that you're aware of the information that you're posting as well. And finally, if you're interested in legal organizations that help individuals who are innocent, I highly recommend you look into something known as the Innocence Project. If you live in the United States, you have the option to help your state innocence project. They're very open and receptive most of the time to student volunteers and younger volunteers as well. It is a great cause, and it really helps innocent people step out of incarceration as well. So I think that would be a legal project that I would highly recommend if you are interested in getting involved. Thanks for joining us on the Politicast. Today, we were able to have a strong discourse about the media's influence in two cases, the Menendez and the Luigi and Mangione case. We also covered ways that you can potentially get involved or more educated regarding policy and legal topics. So, as always, we'll end with a fun trivia question. So, here is one. When you graduate law school in the US, you earn a JD. What does JD stand for? Jury doctor, jury donor, juris donor, or juris doctor? Make sure to answer in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next episode.